So today, we're going to be continuing our series about making it right. And this month, we've been going down this idea of these wrong things being made right by God. And we talked about forgiveness in a very deep way at the beginning of the month. We talked about forgiving ourselves. And today, we're going to be talking about how it can be different now. It's different now. And what the idea is how some friendships last a lifetime. Some friendships last a lifetime, while a vast majority of others last only for a season. And we often feel conflicted about these kinds of changes within ourselves that no longer necessarily align with certain relationships that we've had in the past, with people that we care about, with workplaces that we care about. And it can be a confusing experience to feel like you have to choose between what you now believe or what you're now doing and the friends who were with you for the journey before you got this new identity. Y'all dig what I'm saying? And today we're going to look at the friendship between Paul and Barnabas as we talk about the changing dynamics of relationships and values. And we're going to unpack what it is to appreciate the value of those friendships, even though they're changing. And we're going to learn to understand the difference between loyalty and free will. And we're going to also talk about God's ability to redeem things regardless of who's right or wrong in the matter. Now, this is important to talk about because many people live in this state of such extreme when viewing their relationships. The reality is that people change, period. People change. And just because we go through these different changes doesn't mean that we have to burn these bridges in the process, to where as we go through these changes, we think that the people that we were once with or the people that were once close to us or in our friendships that are now we're slandering the people that didn't change with us. Simply doesn't have to be like that. We can handle these changes with spiritual maturity. And we can also see how we can best reflect God in our lives in the present, even when those changes occur. Now, I want to be abundantly clear about this message. I want to make sure there's no confusion. The relationships that we're talking about today are those like friendships, workplaces, even career paths, even sometimes certain family members, partnerships, things like that. But in this message, we are not talking about marriage. Okay, abundantly clear. Don't think for a second that we're talking about marriage. We're not at all within this message. Maybe there's some things that you might be able to find are somewhat applicable, but we are not talking about the dynamics of marriage relationships. And it's important to understand this because not every relationship should be treated like another. I once heard someone say, well, I don't discipline my kids because how are they going to grow up thinking that when they're in a romantic relationship and they think that, oh, well, when they're mean to me or if they deprive me of something, then that's what I'm supposed to expect because that's the way my parents treated me when they disciplined me. And I was like, that was the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. It's a completely different relationship. That of a parent to a child is completely different than that of a husband to a wife, right? I'll discipline my kids, but I ain't going to be disciplining Lauren. There's no way I could do that. I'll be coming over here with a black eye. You'll be able to see Lauren's handprint and which ring she wears her finger on my face. It'd be so red. But every relationship, these dynamics are different. And so don't try to use what we're talking about today when we're talking about friendships, when we're talking about workplace career paths and relationships like that. Don't confuse it to be that of a marriage relationship. Lauren is my best friend, but she's not like any other guy friend that I have. Y'all know what I'm saying? And so we have to understand the difference as we go through this today. And don't confuse the intention of this message. Y'all feel me? All right, so now that we got that disclaimer, I need y'all on the seats of every chair, there's a disclaimer for y'all to sign saying that you recognize what I said today. Check it off and initial. And don't you dare say, well, I remember in this message. No, that's not today. Get started now with the first point, which is they changed my life. You can appreciate somebody and still disagree with them. Let's pause there for a minute. That's good. You can appreciate somebody and still disagree with them. See, there's many times where we have a best friend that either changes or doesn't change with us. Happens all the time. But we turn the knives out on each other when those changes happen, and we start to accuse one another of all of our history to be ingenuine because of the changes we're experiencing now. Y'all dig what I'm saying? And just because there's differences in the present doesn't mean that it was so in the past. The truth is, we feel extra emotional about these relationships. Be honest with yourself. You're feeling emotional with the changes. And we don't always recognize the changes that we are both going through in the thick of it. We don't think that we're changing, and we think to ourselves, you've changed. Take a look in the mirror. We've all changed. If you're the same exact person that you are today that you were 10 years ago, then that's crazy. I don't know how you cannot change as an individual. We go. I mean, I literally use different hot sauces than I used 10 years ago. You know, that's just my taste buds. Don't you think that if you were to be honest with yourself, the things that you value now are different than the things you valued 5, 10 years ago? It changes dramatically. And it's because of the experiences that we have and the experiences that we go through. We have these changes. And so to recognize these changes happen in both us and these friends of ours, these relationships, these workplaces. You never had a job that you once loved, but then you felt like things kind of changed and you started to hate the place you used to love to work at. You know, things change. And rather than turning the knives out, recognize the change, appreciate that you can feel emotional about it. It's okay to feel emotional, but it's also time to appreciate that you both had a season of mutual friendship or workplace, whatever, and that you can appreciate that. Now, let's look at Paul and Barnabas. And there's, if you want to follow along in the Bible in each of your chairs, we're going to be on page 535. Whether you want to follow along on the Bible in each of your chairs, or if you want to follow along up here, it's page 535, and we're reading in the ESV version, and it's Acts chapter 9, verse 26 through 27. And this is the beginning of Paul and Barnabas' friendship and relationship. It says, "And when he had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples, and they were all afraid of him, for they did not believe that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles." It's talking about Paul, by the way. "And declared to them on the road how on the road he had seen the Lord and spoke to him, and how at Damascus he had preached boldly in the name of Jesus." So to understand where this friendship starts with Paul and Barnabas, Barnabas was the only person that believed Paul in his heart. They had a genuine change, and that he had an authentic conversion to Christianity. People were literally not opening the door for Paul to come in, as he was fleeing for his life for preaching Christ. He had changed and started proclaiming Jesus to others, and the very people that sent him out to go persecute the church started persecuting him. And Barnabas was the only one there for Paul at the beginning of his conversion. And there was this investment of trust, and as a reciprocation, there was this amazing brotherhood and partnered ministry. See, it just as much as Paul's life was blessed and changed by Barnabas' extension of friendship, so was Barnabas' life. Barnabas was a local encourager, okay? He was the idea of encouraging people in the church. He had no title, he had no specific affiliation, but he loved to encourage people. Paul was a mission-driven person. So where as soon as he gives his life to Christ, he's doing just all this ministry and preaching and evangelizing, and now he partners with Barnabas, And they start this ministry together to where Barnabas gets to witness miraculous, powerful glory of God as they go around planting churches and seeing literal healings and miracles take place through their ministry. He was not seeing that firsthand before from anything we read about before. He's participating in the local church, but he's not actively serving and planting churches like he is with Paul. He has a complete life change through the friendship that he has in Paul. Paul has the compassion and community offered that nobody else could offer him. Think about the times that you felt incredibly alone, but you had that one friend that reached out to you. Maybe you even believed that you were cursed, that no one likes you. But you had that one friend that extended that open hand. That was Barnabas to Paul. See, Paul would have been completely alone, and that loneliness might have even driven him to give up. But Barnabas' friendship encouraged him to take hold of his purpose, even though it was so rocky at the beginning. It was this mutual partnership, this mutual friendship to where they both blessed each other. And we have to understand that both people were valuable even though they provided different things to one another. See, when we look at our friendships of our past, we often look at it one-sided. It's easy for us to think, well, I was always there for them for like this. Well, I was the one always doing this. I was the one always doing that. Let's be honest. Would you have even been friends with them if there wasn't this mutual closure, this mutual satisfaction that came from that friendship? Are there some friends to where it feels like you're just doing everything, they don't really care about you? Yeah, sure. That's not like that's not as much as like a best friend like Paul and Barnabas. Those are friendships that are more like acquaintances. You dig what I'm saying? We're talking about this mutual friendship where y'all were close and it was real. Now things are changing and you feel like there's this void, this space. Whether it's a friendship, whether it's specific types of family members, or whether it's even a workplace, a career path, a boss, whatever it may be, you can appreciate what was there. And you don't have to say, this is no longer serving me and make it all about me, myself, and I. You can respect that they benefited your life in some way, while recognizing that perhaps that seasons have changed and it might be time for one of y'all, for y'all to move on from one another. Y'all feel me? We can disagree without killing one another. We could be decent spiritual people even when we have disagreements. You ever have a friend that you are so close and all of a sudden in the last couple of years you realize that y'all have vastly different political opinions? And all of a sudden you start doubting everything. Well, guess what? You can still appreciate their friendship even though they vote differently than you. Okay? We can be mature adults. What I find funny, I don't know how to say this in the most polite way, but I'm going to say it the best I can. And have grace for me. I don't necessarily see, but whenever Lauren is scrolling through TikTok, I'm there. I have to endure it. I'm just, trying to chill out, play a game, or watch TV. But I hear it. It's just part of my life now. So I'll hear it playing and scrolling. And her algorithm's all messed up right now. It's nothing funny coming out of that. But what I've noticed that there's a lot of people that talk about adulting as if it's like this profession, like the adulting. And now that I'm adulting, you got to do this. It's like, and it's been trending into relationships. And it's like, I realize that part of adulting is protecting my peace. And it's like, I think it's hilarious that we're treating relationships that we have as adults like the same way that we did when we're in high school, but then call it adulting because we're treating the exact same way and we're labeling it. Y'all dig what I'm saying? It's like petty relationships. I realize that they're not really benefiting me anymore, and so it's just not serving me, and so I had to let it go. It's like, that sounds like kids I would counsel in high school for like messed up friendships. But They said, they labeled it correctly. And so now it's adulting. Look, we need to chill out and realize that we're not so as superior and intelligent as we think we are. The real adulting is being mature enough to appreciate someone even though you disagree with them. Not pretending that you're so much smarter and better than them that you had to cut them off because they're a leech on your life. That's not maturity. Y'all dig what I'm saying? That actually came out a lot more polite than I originally thought in my head. So, pat on the back for me. That was good. Now that we learned to appreciate friendships even though they change, we learned about being mature and spiritual even when we recognize changes in our values and what we care about. Now, let's talk about how you have a choice. We are not bound to the same values that we had in the past. We're not bound to the same values that we had in the past. See, these confusing moments is when these kinds of friendships is when there is this clear recognition of you both changing in different directions. But you still feel bound to one another out of the loyalty of the history spent together. And again, we're not talking about marriage. Okay? This is where it really comes in about marriage. See, marriage is different. We're talking about friendships. You feel bound to one another because you think, well, we've spent so much history together. They've been my friend for X amount of years. I don't want to just abandon it. And you got to understand that mindset is almost like a gambler at a casino. It's where I've already spent so much, I might as well use my gas money too. It is not edifying to cling to something that is counterproductive or counterintuitive to the values that you have now. There's a personal example for me. There's friendships I had when I first gave my life to Christ, to where, I'll even go back further. There's friendships I had before I gave my life to Christ, and I had a dramatic change of values. And as I tried to keep those friendships because of the loyalty spent together, I recognized that they did not want to go in the same direction I was going. A big part for me was a path of sobriety. I'm not saying that sobriety is a must when it comes to our faith, but for me, it was a critical part of my faith to where path of sobriety. Again, I'm not saying that drugs or alcohol is a sin, but for me, it was. And as I went down this path, none of those friends wanted to go down that path with me. In fact, they didn't even want to go down the Christian path with me. And when I tried to still cling to those friendships out of loyalty and history, it became abundantly clear that I could not keep my new values with these old friendships. And I had to either choose to let my new values go in order to keep this history and loyalty, or to appreciate these new values, appreciate the changes, and part ways. And the more that I tried to keep the history, the more it was damaging to the potential of my values. To the point where, again, these were like brothers to me. We would get jumped together. If one of us slept outside, we would all sleep outside. We would steal food together. You don't know friendship unless you're stealing some tortillas from people's plates with somebody else because you're starving. And that's how close we were. But when the night came where at first it's polite enough to say, oh yeah, it's cool if you don't want to drink with us, it's cool. By the end of the night, I mean, come on man, cut it out. And holding me down, putting bottles and pipes up to my mouth. It's like, again, this is an extreme case, but it was a visual of what happens regardless of the situation when we try to cling to history of different directions, different paths. What is it saying? You are who your friends are? And so with that parting of ways, I had to develop new friendships. I could still appreciate my homies from the past, but I couldn't keep my homies with me. And with these new friendships I had in the Christian walk, I was able to learn and appreciate them. We were able to grow in our faith. But guess what? Some time passes, 5 years, 6 years, and all of a sudden I'm going into ministry, and I'm developing in leadership skills and things like that. While the friends I once had at the beginning of the Christian walk, they're just more so like just chilling as Christian friends. And that's cool. They can do that. They don't have to do what I'm doing. But our values were so different to where there's like nothing in common that we could edify with one another. To where the things that I'm concerned about, that I'm talking about, are completely different than the things that they're concerned about. Y'all follow me? A simple way to understand in a general saying is when you have kids, when you get married, do you not almost immediately recognize that your friendships change? It's like your single friends it's like there's just this gap there. Because with the friends that you have without kids, there's just this gap. And it's not that it has to be this divisive gap. There's times where it works, times where it doesn't, but it's just this recognition that your values are different. You're now consumed with this idea of raising a child, and everything that you do is a part of raising that child. All of a sudden, you're going to parks. Like, when you ever go to a park, all of a sudden you're searching parks. You're thinking about restaurants that are kid friendly. Like your whole dynamic of life and values changes according to what you're going through. I mean, people even change their political views based off of their children. Like, it's like so much changes with these different changes in our lives. And again, all I'm saying is when you recognize those changes, you do not have to feel bound to stay with people that are on a different path. You're able to freely and wholeheartedly let that go and move on. And I think that where I hear most people, well, let me share this verse, and I'll share that part. I don't want to give too much away first, you know. Let me share this verse in Acts, the book, Acts chapter 15, verse 36 through 40. And it's page 539 on those Bibles, if you want to follow in paper. And Paul and Barnabas, by this point, have planted multiple churches. This is them about to go on their second missionary journey. And it says, and after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are." So he's saying, let's go check on those churches we planted. Now Barnabas wanted to take with them John, called Mark. But Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose to Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. Now, this is like one of the most poetic turn of events when you recognize that's what's going on. When you recognize that this is a brotherhood so close, their beginning started so beautifully, they're doing so much work in ministry together, and in a single passage, they completely separate from one another, like a bad breakup. And what's interesting to understand what's going on, Mark, on their first missionary journey, originally went with Paul and Barnabas, but he bailed out in the middle of the trip and went back home because it was a lot more rigorous than anticipated. And so now they're about to go again, and Barnabas is saying, "Hey, let's give Mark a second chance." And Paul is saying, "No way, dog. It's not happening." Because when Mark bailed out, consider that they're not just in a van, going to the next place. Each person has a role when they're going on this kind of traveling, to where people are holding supplies together. They're relying on them to hold each person to hold a set amount of supplies, their rations. Like they prepared for this trip. They only have so much food. They only have so much clothes. They only have so much work, and they all had a role to play on this journey. So for one person to bail out, it made all of their work that much harder on that journey. And so Paul, in his mission-minded heart saying, I'm not willing to risk it. I'm not willing. If he already abandoned us before, we're not going to risk that again. Let's do this mission for our time is short. While Barnabas, in his mind, he's thinking, how would that have worked out for you if I didn't allow you to be one to be encouraged like Mark needed to be encouraged? See, they both are right, even though they both disagree. They both care about things that matter, but their values are completely different. Barnabas is seeing Mark as the one he needs to encourage and mentor right now. While Paul is so focused on mission, he needs to plant as many churches as he can. And here's the beautiful part. If Barnabas did not separate, if he hindered his values, he would have never gone with Mark. And if Paul hindered his values, then he would have brought Mark on. And if they would have never separated, you know what, I'm actually jumping ahead, my bad. Just forget where that direction was going. See, this disagreement was so sharp that they parted ways. And I want us to understand that what that would look like in our church today. Like, imagine if there was such a sharp disagreement. Well, me and Lauren are married, so that would be like real rough. But imagine if there's like we do ministry partnered together. They were so close to one another. It would be like the idea of me and Lauren separating and going different ways. To where, imagine how the early church felt about this disagreement. Of how this is like a big, just like, oh, they're not friends anymore? No, this is a huge separation. And they had been this unstoppable team and made so much progress together as they paved the way for the early Gentile converts. And now, think about the believers who were devastated by the news of their separation. But at the end of the day, they were both holding fast to their values. Paul was focused on the mission, while Barnabas was focusing on encouraging the individual. Both were right, and they had this season together where their values happened to line up perfectly in sync. But then, now they had to choose between their values and what they believed to be their purpose or their history together. And that's a big decision to make. The point to capture here is you always have a choice. You always have a choice to who and what you belong to. And it's okay to simply separate from people or groups at certain times. Now, what I was going to mention earlier is what I hear most commonly when Christians are incredibly confused is when they feel this kind of history and connection to their church or their workplace. And now, keep in mind, like this is, I'm talking about the idea of I'm a pastor, I hold a congregation, but what I would find time and time again is that people would feel so much conflict because the church that they once served at, they feel like their values no longer align. But they feel stuck in the sense that, well, this is a church I grew up in, or this is a church I got saved at, but now I feel like it's just my values are so much different than what they value. And they feel this conflict. And I've heard of sometimes, this doesn't always happen, but I've even heard some people have a meeting with the pastor and saying, I feel like I need to try out a different church. And the pastor tells them, that's witchcraft. that's the devil talking to you. What do you mean? God's here at this church. You're listening to the wrong voice. And people feel incredibly confused because of the sense of loyalty and the change of their values. Here, we see Paul and Barnabas, two of the most spiritual people that we could read about in Scripture, and they had a disagreement, but didn't force each other to stay with one another. They separated. And they went on to continue to do the work of the Lord. They continued to do meaningful things even though they had separated. If they were able to separate and still see the glory of God move, if they were able to fulfill their purposes together, if these guys separated, don't you think that we have a little wiggle room? Don't you think that we have some freedom of choice? And it's this idea of recognizing that perhaps that season has changed. At once it aligned perfectly, but now maybe it doesn't. And you have the freedom of choice. And consider this, that the times that it's projected that you don't have the freedom to choose, that is a cult-like mentality. Is a cult-like mentality to take away the freedom of choice. Every single one of y'all, if your values change, and you felt like your values no longer aligned with the church, with Gravetop Church, you have the freedom of choice to go to a church that aligns with your values, a church that you feel comfortable in the direction that they're going and growth. Except you, Daniel, you have to stay. And Jake, you have to stay. Well, actually, you know what? Let me just start naming off a couple people real quick. But see, that it's a freedom of choice that you have to go where you believe is best for this part of your journey. And to try to control that, it only makes people feel terrible on the inside. It makes us feel confused, and it damages the history that was spent together instead of allowing people to appreciate the history that was spent together. Y'all dig what I'm saying? Again, not talking about marriage. Completely different. You got to stick it out. All right, now let's move on to the last point, which is anything is possible. Always give an opportunity for redemption. This is one of our aspirational values. It's an incredibly beautiful thing about life to know that anything is possible with God. Anything is possible with God. Whether it's seeing something dead come to life or witnessing a terrible mistake being used for good, God's ability to redeem people, to redeem situations, or anything else is beyond what we can imagine. And for Paul and Barnabas, this separation seems devastating at first. But we're going to read it in page 579 of those Bibles in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9 through 11. And Paul says, "For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens, whatever, has gone to Galatia. Titus to Dalmatia. Do your best to come to me soon. Luke alone is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry." See, this is the most poetic redemption story ever. Because we see Paul, years later, telling Timothy that in his lonely moments, saying, everyone else has deserted me. What did Mark do back in the day? He deserted him. But in this moment, it says, bring Mark with you when you come to visit. He is useful to the work that I am doing. It's a redemption story for Paul and Mark. But capture this. If Paul would have never separated from Barnabas, and Barnabas never separated from Paul, what if they just said, you know what, we got all this history, why stop a good thing? We're going to just keep it going. Barnabas would have never mentored Mark. Mark is the one, is a little illumination, he wrote, guess what book? The book of Mark. Without if Barnabas did not encourage him and mentor him as a disciple, he may have well never found his calling and purpose to gather the writings that he did for the Gospel of Mark, which is one of the 4 Gospels that bring people to salvation today. And on top of the work that he's clearly doing with Paul later on, but also consider if Paul would have never separated from Barnabas, Paul would have never chose Silas. Paul would have never chose Luke to partner with him. Luke ends up becoming a right-hand man to Paul. And guess what book he wrote? The book of Luke and the book of Acts. And Paul would have never found another mentee. He may have never found Timothy to mentor. And Timothy ended up becoming a pivotal disciple for Paul as he is pastoring the church of Ephesus. I mean, there's so much that may not have happened if they would have clung to the history instead of recognizing their change of values. And it's this beautiful moment that regardless of who seemed to be right or wrong in the moment. See, even as I talked about the reasons of which they separated, maybe in your head you think, well, Paul was right. Or maybe you're thinking, well, Barnabas was right. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who was more right or who was more wrong. And God was able to use that for good. Their separation. Could you ever imagine that a separation of ministry would be used for good? Of a powerful ministry like theirs to be used for good. But with God, anything is possible. In the same way, we don't have to hold the weight of every possible outcome on our shoulders, thinking that if we make this little mistake, it's going to ruin the rest of our lives. It's going to completely destroy our purpose if we make a mistake. And so we just cower in fear to make a decision because we're so afraid of what the outcome will be. But to understand that God is able to do above than what we can imagine with both the things that we do right and the things that we do wrong. That whether we're doing something great or making a mistake, God is able to use it for good. Does that not give you peace knowing that you don't have to hold the decisions of the universe with every little thing that you do? I want you to consider that weight that you carry. That weight that you carry. And as we've been going through this series of making things right, and we've been going through this series, maybe you've even been considering the things that have been wrong in your life. Maybe you've been considering the mistakes that you've made. And you've been just struggling to move forward because you're still clinging to the weight of responsibility from the decisions of the past. And right now, I really believe that God is trying to show you that you can trust Him even with that. That He can even use what could have been wrong and use it for good still. That not all is lost, but He's able to turn anything around. With that being said, I want us to take a moment to pray and bow our heads and close our eyes. And if you're here in this moment of prayer, and maybe the thing that you are considering on your heart and mind is realizing that you have never made a clear decision to trust God with those mistakes. Maybe you've never made a decision to trust God with your life in general, and you're recognizing that there's this push in your heart and you want to do that today. You want to make a clear decision in which you put your trust in God through Jesus. If that is you, I want you to just raise your hand. I see your hand. And so just there to yourself, I want you to have your own conversation with Jesus. The Bible says in the book of Romans that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is who He says He is, surely you shall be saved. What He's saying is, if you have a genuine heart and talk to Him yourself, that's all it takes to start this journey with Him. That's all it takes to start this redemption story with Him, this relationship with Him. You don't need me to lead you through a pretty prayer. You don't need to write down a list of rules and regulations to follow a religion. It's about having a genuine relationship with your Creator through Jesus. So if that was you, just have that conversation now. And while they're doing that, for the rest of you here, if you feel like this message was for you, a message that you needed to hear today, you feel like the Holy Spirit is trying to encourage you and speak to you and show you that He's got this, and you needed to hear to this today. With every head still bowed and eye closed, if that was you, I want you to raise your hand. I see all your hands. So now I'm going to pray for you. Holy Spirit, I pray that you finish the work that you started in their lives. I pray that you show your power and your glory to be seen in their situations, the things that are weighing heavy on their hearts, that you'd reveal yourself strong. I pray, Lord, that you would turn things around and that you use whatever it is heavy on their heart and use it for good. I pray that you would show them even this week glimpses and signs of your Spirit working and moving. And I pray that you finish what you started in their life. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Thank you for being a part of the Gravetop Church online community. I hope that today's message inspired you and that it made a difference in your life. If you'd like to connect with our church or if you'd like to donate towards our mission, all you have to do is go to gravetopchurch.com and find the Ways to Connect tab or the Donate tab. Either way, I'm so grateful for you being a part of today. Until next time, have a great life.